Welcome to Manhood Race Culture Interactive. Um, Tonight, we are going to be discussing what is, in many ways, a interesting for some, controversial for others, natural for even more so, hopefully, topic, which is dealing with the case of African American male studies. This topic has arisen for us because, quite simply, we recently had legislation coming out of the state of Illinois that is mandating the K through 12 school system to go ahead and teach Pacific Islander and Asian history. The question before us tonight is quite simply, if it is so easy for them to do it, why haven't we done it? And also, is the study of African American males a topic, subject matter that is worthy of being pursuing within not just the K through 12, but also the larger academy? So I open the floor to our illustrious panel. We have quite a few people here. When you step in, please tell the people who you are, and also let them know how they could contact you as far as social media goes, or email, or whatever you're comfortable with. So the floor is open to you. Do you believe? Well, the first question is, well, let's start with, do you believe that we should have a discipline specifically dedicated to African American males? The floor is yours, panel.
Dr. Jones, that's an interesting question, and I'll chime in. I'm Mark Spivey. I'm from the greater Houston area. I am a 18-year veteran teacher of world history, United States history, social studies in general. And that question came to me today when I was having a meeting with the SPED department at Stafford High School.
Okay.
And a young lady who happened to go to high school with me way back in the 70s took over the position of the lead SPED director there. And when I told her that I just finished teaching US history and preparing the kids for the STAR exam, and then I was going to move down the building closer to her and teach geography and world history, she said, Coach Spivey, I'm a high school girls basketball coach also. The state of Texas allows schools to introduce the African American history curriculum throughout the state now, and the world history portions of social studies aren't needed to be taught anymore per se. And she asked me, had we had such a program or curriculum in our high school? And I told her, I said, you know what? It's funny that I had mentioned that to our associate superintendent last year, who was a Prairie View A&M graduate like myself. And she said, Coach Spivey, why don't you introduce one and run it through the proper channels, and then we can introduce it during our next professional development and see how everybody feels about it. Now, frankly, I think that was a step in the right direction, but the necessity of having such a program geared to African Americans and African American men in general, I think would be not only trend setting in Texas, but it would help young people, especially people of color, who are interested in learning more about our history that needs to be taught. And I'll end with this. I think we should start it at the elementary levels, right? And let the young people grow into it instead of waiting for them to get to high school and be introduced to it. If you remember World War II, how Hitler indoctrinated his youth in elementary schools on up about Nazism. That way, when they became adults, it was already entrenched in them. So there's no comparisons, in regards to Hitler and what he did ultimately, but the ideology seems to work, Doc. And so I'm going to leave it like that, and I'm going to say I think it's a great idea that we do it.
All right, thank you for that, brother Spivey. One of the things that I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, and I was actually a part of a working group that recommended, as we have Mexican American history, we were supposed to have African American history allowed in the junior colleges and community colleges. I was a part of that group that met in Austin. Um, a lot of what you said really resonates with me. Probably one of the strongest resonations that I have is talking with my students about the idea of J. Edgar Hoover citing the Black Panther Party for self-defense being the single greatest danger to the internal security of the United States. And I asked them why. And none of them could guess it. And I'm going to present that question to the group right here. Why did J. Edgar Hoover call the Black Panther Party for self-defense the most dangerous, serious threat to the internal security of the United States?
Grit. One word, grit.
It's grits, believe it or not. And my students are always taken aback. They're saying, "Oh, what do you mean by grits?" And what Hoover was talking about is the free breakfast for children program. And if you raise children up, as Coach Spivey is talking about, in the way that they should go, they shall not depart from it as they get older. And I do this experiment with my students because they believe that it is everyone but them. They have the exceptionalism curse. It's them, but it's not me. So let's do this experiment real quick. And it's really aimed at dealing with this idea of how a child is raised up in those formative years. Let's sing 2 songs and join in. Please open your mics and join in with the song that you know. I guarantee that you'll know one of them. I'll be impressed if you know both of them. Okay, y'all ready? Y'all mics ain't open. Let's open our mics. The mic, get your singing voice together. Okay, everybody ready?
Ready.
Okay. Black is beautiful.
Set our warrior free.
What's the line between that though?
Yeah, I remember
Black
saying
is
that warrior
beautiful.
Free
free.
Huey. Free
Free
Huey.
Huey.
Mhm.
Set our warrior free. It's an old Black Panther Party song.
Mhm.
Okay, that was taught to at the Breakfast for Children programs when Huey P. Newton was incarcerated for the alleged shooting of Officer John Fry. Let's go to the second song. Now, if you know this song, please join in. Don't be shy. Okay, I get it if you didn't know the first one. Let's go with this second one. Brother Maurice, go ahead and make your mic hot because I'm pretty sure you know this one. Okay. The song goes like this. Old MacDonald had a farm.
So,
Okay. And that's my way of really displaying to them
Mhm.
that, yeah, you too. When you were raised up within the mainstream
Mhm.
educational experience, they got you too. Okay. So very good points. Brother Nedrick, you wanted to jump in?
Well, I was just saying, when we look at Black men and Black masculinity, I often think about Dr. King, and he was once noted for being the most dangerous man in the United States. And I think that anytime that we give Black men a platform where they can speak to the masses using their past inherited, what others would call disposition, and take that and make something beautiful out of it, then they become a threat. And so, and even when we look at uh, Malcolm X and how great he was as an orator and the legacy that he built, we lose him in the history. We don't find him in the textbook as often as we found the founding fathers of the United States, or that we find the early poets and things of that nature. So I think that we speak to the masses and then we're carved out of the conversation as time progresses.
Okay, very good, my brother. Very good. Someone else want to jump in?
y'all hop in here. I mean, here's my question: who's implementing this? So this African American history programs. I was listening to Nas's Untitled album about a couple of days ago, actually, and Nigger, Slave and the Master came on. I love that line, and he says, anytime we talk about our history, our condition, our existence, they call it reverse racism. So if we really want to, we can't really tell our story without telling our struggles. So, and I think, unfortunately, I don't think America's really ready to hear all that truth. They're not prepared to hear that truth, to hear basically from us the evil things that have been done to Black men and to Black people in general. So I'm not.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is a question directed at you, but it also is one that anyone can feel free to join in on. If we're waiting on them to be ready, how long are we going to be waiting? Should that be a factor?
Waiting. My thing is this was not do it. I just say let's not do it in their institutions. My argument. I think we do that. We do it in our institutions at our own peril. You know, I'm all for Black studies and Black male studies. I'm just telling you, you're not going to get what you're expecting in their institutions. We can't really talk real and talk straight in those institutions because people are going to start getting real uncomfortable and start undoing their ties real fast when we start putting out the real history of Black men. So that's all I'm saying. I think you do and pursue Black male studies in these white institutions at your own peril. That's all. Now I'll yield back.
Okay.
And
I'd
like to say something. I'd like to say something. Just to counter that a little bit. I think we should start it in our inner city schools, where we are more accepting to receiving it. The suburbs have, schools in the suburbs and in rural areas have a variety of ways to even rename something like that in regards to, Black men. They would call it a cultural class, trying to make it more inclusive or all inclusive, just to soften the name and the blow up what the curriculum should be all about. I think that, we can take a school district like Houston Independent School District, which is predominantly really Hispanic, if you think about it, but with a pretty solid African American, population there, and you introduce it into those areas like North Forest ISD or the former North Forest ISD, or other places where they're looking to excite young African American men and boys to learn something fun. We start throwing out all those old rap songs like Dr. Jones like to play. They heard their parents and your mom and daddies and uncles playing those songs. I introduced to my class every day a different aspect of African American music to kids who are not of color. And then they ask, I put the lyrics up there with them so they can read the lyrics. They love Michael Jackson. They don't really care about us, but they didn't understand what the word meant until I put the lyrics up there and let them see it. And so I think that the brother who just made that point about them being more accepting or hardly being accepting of what we're trying to introduce, I think we have to start by targeting our areas first, and then go outward. Get them on the inside, start attacking from the inside out.
Okay, can I kind of point you, Brother Spivey? I love what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I think, unfortunately, you're going to find a lot of resistance, not necessarily from white folks. I'm talking about from Black people who are going to resist you. I've noticed that. I've implemented every year. I teach physiology to high school kids. I coach girls soccer, and I've noticed I start a project every single year that, hey, you're going to pick one Black physician or science or healthcare worker or one Hispanic physician or healthcare worker and do a project for it. And the biggest resistance I get every single year is not from white kids, it's not from Latino kids, it's always from Black kids who don't want to do the project, who don't want to go and do that research and go find out and do that rich. They resist me more than anybody else. Even Black parents have resisted me on this. So, so when you have Black kids in a white context, they don't even understand who the heck they are. So that's kind of my concern, my issue, what I've seen, because I'm not, the hell with white folks, they can do what the heck they want to do. But what I'm saying to you is I'm worried about our own people resisting more than anything else. then I'm worried about
Mhm.
white people fighting against me.
Mhm.
That's all I'm saying.
I understand. I got you.
All right, anyone else want to join in?
And I teach literature in higher ed, and so a lot of times I'm given the loose courses. Say for instance, a Jane Austen course. How do I bring us into the 18th century? So if I can't talk about us by name, the nameless Black body, then I talk about us by the dutiful of service. How we allow people. Sojourner Truth says, "No one give me any best place ever or helps me into carriages over ditches." But there were a time that Black men didn't have carriages and ditches, but we drove them just as well. So I take
Mm-hmm.
and into the room with me, no matter what the subject area is, no matter if I'm invited to a conference that's on 18th century writing. I go to the announcer and say, okay, before I go to the stage, play me Brown Skin,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or play me the instrumental to NWA. So
Mm-hmm.
to find a way to give us the best place ever, even when we're unwelcomed in those spaces. And not just to take ourselves in the room because our names are printed on the program, but to summon someone who can't speak no longer to the masses and take them forth with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly beautiful, my brother, beautiful. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, peace. This is brother Mike X from New York City. I am an autodidact, self-taught person. When I was in what I believe Minister Farrakhan used to call the killing fields, man, meaning the public school education
Mm-hmm.
system. They had no real plan to, or a program to reach out to young, precocious,
Mm-hmm.
intelligent boys like myself, and there was an effort, in the early 70s to push boys that they couldn't reach with their
Mm-hmm.
boring curriculums, and their misunderstanding of what is going on, or maybe just flat out not caring, about the plight of Black America. I found myself very quickly in special education, for behavioral issues, and even while I was in special education, my desire and thirst for knowledge and history still allowed me to score 5, 6 grades ahead of my level, my grade level, in the citywide tests. And there was no effort to say, whoa, maybe there was a misdiagnosis. Maybe, something's wrong. This dude is in special ed, but he's in 7th grade and he's already reading at college level. I just preface that. I say that to I've learned more after I left school than I ever learned while I was in school. And without going too long, I do think that there should be a fight. I know that there was a fight a long time in back in the 90s. It was called the Curriculum of Inclusion with Dr. Clark, Dr. John Henry Clark, and others, who wanted to fight to introduce a curriculum of inclusion into the colleges and into the high schools and what have you. And I do think that that fight is relevant, but I also think that there's something to say about the science, again, of autodidactism, that people like Malcolm X, people like Honorable Elijah Muhammad and others, there's something noteworthy to strive to turn on the light in our people's minds and in their hearts, and to introduce them to the prodigious scholars and that we have, the Marcus Garveys, the Frederick Douglasses. I saw the picture, the brother got the book over his left shoulder, and to make it something that's not necessarily about college, or that's not necessarily about high school, but this is something about you taking back your human dignity, your cultural dignity, you know, your Black dignity, you know, and trying to, you know, they just had the thing about Black Wall Street. And some people are just finding out about Black Wall Street now. But we were talking about Black Wall Street, you know, I know for myself, you know, this was 30, 35 years ago, we was talking about Black Wall Street. And to me, there was like a paltry, you know, recognition. And even the ones who was talking about it was just talking about it as, oh man, there was once a city that, you know, that Black people owned and it got bombed, and, you know, let's just chalk it up for another thing to be bitter about. You know, I'm just saying all this to say that we need to do all of these things at the same time. And these things have to recognize that all Black people don't live in one place. You know, we're spread out across the country. And there needs to be this fight it's not about us against them. It's about us taking ownership and responsibility over ourselves, you know? And Black consciousness cannot just be like a career choice. Mm-hmm. It needs to be like a lifestyle, you know? And there needs to be like a healthy, like, I guess, cultural nationalism attached to trying to help Black people to think and believe that it's cool again to want to be mentally, spiritually alive, you know? So I feel kind of like, I hope that I spoke to what I'm hearing a little bit. I'm not against the move to strive to force the schools that we are mandated under the punishment of fine and imprisonment, you know, to have to put our children in these schools. If that's the thing, you know, presently, before we can get our own schools, if we have to put our children in these schools, then we definitely should fight to impact the curriculums. But I don't think that that's enough. You also have to strive to awaken Black people's minds and begin to have mentoring programs and all types of things, you know, outside of the public schools, you know, to strive to get Black people to become awake again and to want to, you know, be like a Frederick Douglass or a Malcolm or a Huey P. Newton in them, you know. So I'm gonna fall back on that.
Okay, thank you for that, Brother Mike. You know, one of the questions that has arisen just in this brief conversation that we're having right now is the question of, are we talking about a new academic discipline, a department, so to speak, in African American male studies, or are we seeking to inject into the pre-existing system curriculum, readings, and what have you, that are specifically dealing with and revolving around the African American male experience? And if so, if that's the way that we're going, should it be cordoned off to just African American males, or should every population, every demographic be able to enter into these programs? And I yield.
Help me understand. Is this like assuming? What about Black studies? Doesn't it already exist, or African American studies?
Well, African American studies exists, but you have these initiatives aimed at aiding African American males. Okay, so in essence, what I'm asking you is that the direction that we should be going, a initiative, or is it a and if we are going that direction, is that something that should be available to all students, or should it just be cordoned off and specifically aimed and targeted like a marksman, an academic marksman, at African American males who have historically, according to data, lagged behind other groups and other populations?
I'll jump in. So I'm working in the area of Black masculinity studies as displayed in American fiction after 1950. And my argument is this, is that we have feminism, which is a literary school of criticism, which has three different ways. We have womanism by Alice Walker. We have Black feminism. Where is this conversation specifically carved out for Black men? Now, the argument around who articulates this conversation, we have it in the research when we look at Frederick Douglass, Dr. James Trotman, We have it when we look at Cornel West. We have it when we read King's biography. The material is there. Now the argument nowadays is who can argue well for this for this specific group. Who's the person to articulate? And that comes through publishing, because anything spoken now isn't worth anything at any university if it's not teachable and in the printed word. So we have to look at who's allowing these publications, who can publish, who does the Black community say is good enough to speak for this community? Because that argument does come in when we look at the civil rights movement with King and Brother Malcolm. It was about who was arguing for who, when it was all about a unity, as W. Du Bois would cry, the souls of Black folks. Because if I talk about Black masculinity, then I'm talking about the head of the Black family. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna just leave it right there.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a host of issues and questions there, and quite simply, do Black folk have any say in who's going to be allowed to speak for them, especially when you're talking about legitimacy being garnered by publishing in what are by and large white academic peer-reviewed journals? Does that remove some of the authenticity of the Black male voice? Those are all questions that we really need to deal with. One of the things that really gets me is my students arriving, having at least some exposure to other areas of literature. The Diary of Anne Frank, most notably, which sticks in my craw. And I'm just bothered by the fact that the Diary of Anne Frank because they force you to read it. That's the only reason you know it. But you haven't dealt with Native Son. You haven't dealt with Black Boy, the autobiography of an ex-colored man. You haven't dealt with The Invisible Man, let alone some more contemporary writings like Monster, Asada, so those are all, very valid issues. And it brings us back to what Brother Spivey was talking about, the idea of these things being put in motion and already kind of being within the system. But do we have revolutionary minded, courageous people who are able to push those things forward? Can we create a network for the liberation of Black male minds in the midst of a white controlled institution? And I yield with that.
Well, Doc, let me talk a little bit more about that.
Go right ahead.
Our African American kids get somewhat of most of their history lessons offline. When you talk about being political and if you're talking about different types of movements, they really don't pay too much attention to really what's going on in the classroom unless you make it exciting. But then you have another type of genre that offers young people a platform to learn history through social media. Now, it's been taught sometimes by people who are not academics, all right? It's just people who are very, very lyrically skilled and have literary skills, and they can, speak well, oratorical skills. And a lot of times these young people, they take what they see online and they run with it. It's just like back in the day when you had, local music artists who were selling their own mixtapes out of the back of their trunks. Before they got into mainstream music, All right. The foundation has probably already been laid in regards to what these young people, and we're talking about young kids, what they listen to and what they view on YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat. And so, like the brother had said, we have some forms of Black curriculum taught in some colleges. I was listening to, I just lost my train of thought, but I was listening to one of our premier professors who teaches at Harvard, and his audiences are not only made up of Black people, but majority white people, who want to listen to, Cornel West. Okay, if you look at his classes, and he has a lot of stuff out on YouTube. And you see who's asking the questions in his classes. 200 kids deep. They're mostly white people, and I think their interest and doing this, 21st century type of learning and student-centered learning, I think that they would be even more open to helping us push that agenda to open up those classes, because they're more liberating than their fathers and their grandfathers are. And so I think that the platform is there. Put it all together is going to take, it may not be as hard as we think it is. Brother Singleton and Dr. Jones, I can guarantee you somewhere there's an 18-year-old out there on Snapchat talking about history and garnering a following. Okay. And so while we're thinking about, whether it would work or if it would be exceed, someone's laying the groundwork out there for some young kids.
Doing it already. Yeah, doing it already. Yeah. One of my, I can remember being in school and laughing at my teachers. I remember having one teacher who was trying to use the overhead projector, and he just cannot get this thing to work. And he's hitting the power button and moving stuff around, and nothing is lit up. And we're sitting there just rolling. Thing wasn't even plugged into the wall. And I think it's almost poetic justice that all this technology has rushed to the forefront now on us, that laughed at people who couldn't even figure out how to plug it into the wall. They are zooming when it comes to this technology and getting their message out. But the danger for me in regards to that is that so much that is said often is not historically based. We battled, and I won't say any names, we battled on this platform and on one of my brother's platforms against a brother whose allegation was, it was so outlandish and so far out there that it was almost startling. The assertion that persons of African descent were not enslaved. It was white folk who were enslaved. That the transatlantic slave trade never occurred. That what were some of the others? George Washington was Black. Thomas Jefferson was Black. And you're kind of like, if this message gets out there and it's adopted, how many years is it going to take us to undo that? And that's kind of my concern and my caution. But at the exact same time, they're out there doing it. They're getting their message out. And I know Brother Maurice does a wonderful job with social media and what have you, and has kind of pricked me towards doing more of that stuff. But at the same time, there's a part of me who I've gotten old. I like what I like to do. I like to write and X, Y, and Z. But the game has in many ways passed me by, and I yield with that. Great point, brother Spivey.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, because I haven't heard about that. I know I grew up with reading Black Boy, those other books. But maybe things have changed since
you haven't heard about what? You said heard about that.
Like the issue with the guy saying George Washington was Black. That's something that it's wacky, but it sounds like something that I would have heard in college from somebody on some friends group on Central State's campus.
No, it's so far out there, brother. You ain't gonna hear that nowhere other than him.
Okay. But I mean, I have no problem with Black male studies, but my issue is maybe the quest to do something maybe different, because we say on what basis the Black male is the head of the Black family, and that in a sense it's like, well, that hierarchy is still a problem, because
brother, that's coming out the Christian church.
Yeah, and it's like, well, and my thing is like, well, maybe what we need is something new and more inclusive that challenges notions of hierarchy and certain notions of manhood that's problematic, to include more women, to include more other Black niche groups as well. Like one thing about civil rights that surprised a lot of folks, including some parts of my studies, was hearing about these other people involved in civil rights that you didn't hear about. Like there were the women and women and maybe some of the gay folks that were there. They were kind of hidden, pushed to the background back then, but only now we're hearing about it because they're brought forth in frustration that, hey, we neglected to do this, so we won't do things the way we did in the past. We won't teach that way. We're going to be more inclusive. Is there a way to do that without necessarily repeating the same mistakes as far as Black relations go in general?
So when I teach literature, the reflection model that history informs the literature and literature in return reflects the history. But oftentimes what I think the problem is that we start teaching African American literature and history at slavery point or at the end of slavery, and we don't go a little further back with Phyllis Whitley on being brought from Africa to America, and the duality within that language, or we don't go to Gassus Vassus or to what Venture Smith. We don't look at the Frank Yerbys in the literature who wrote all his novels in whiteness. There wasn't a single Black character in his stories, which his papers were out in France. And it becomes the job of new researchers to go and rediscover those people who weren't named. Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander, she wasn't discovered until Alice Walker went back and found her collections and published her work. When we look at Venture Smith, we look at what it meant to have an amanuensis, those things like that. When we look at James Baldwin, we carved him out of the conversation. We carved Jane Rustin out of the conversation. The list going up. So the foundation has been properly laid, but rediscovering the framework and the ways in which, after we get it built, how it is to function. Are we building this to carve to just a space for people, or we're inviting them into room to see that Black and male both can be beautiful and brilliant at the same time?
I hear exactly what you're saying, but to interject the idea of Christianity, it's almost as if a path is being lit with every comment. As soon as you bring up the idea of Christianity, and you have to deal with the issue of patriarchy that Brother OG is talking about, and then when you deal with the issue of patriarchy, you're going to be dealing with the issues of sexuality, because when you're dealing with the idea of Black folk primarily getting their foundation and their teaching, their quote unquote home training coming out of the Christian church, they are, I was raised up within the Baptist church, and I can tell you without a doubt, I did once. I saw a female in the pulpit, and it was my homeboy Rod Crutchfield's daughter, who was getting an award. She had a hearing disability, and so she struggled in school, and she was getting an award for perfect attendance. And we honored the student achievement during the service. And when they called that little sister's name, she was ready, and she jumped up, ran out from the pew, and instead of going all the way around the pulpit to where the Women's Day speaker gave and where they were giving the awards at, she ran across the back of the pulpit. You could hear a gasp from the entire congregation, as if that child had just broke the last seal on Revelations, and y'all, it was getting ready to end right there. The horsemen were at the front door. The idea of introducing gay studies, especially as it deals with African American men, is a Pandora's box. And one of the ways I introduce that issue within my classes, I ask my students, do you know who Baird Rustin is, Brother Alexander? Asa Philip Randolph, Baldwin, and all of those, and they've been omitted. I wouldn't say written out. They've been omitted. Because there's truly no way that you can talk about King and nonviolent civil disobedience within the South without talking about Baird Rustin. There's no way. It's impossible to do unless you go ahead and you get Gandhi and make him King's damn mentor. which is what we see occurring instead of dealing with our brother Baird Rustin or even Asa Philip Randolph, the individual who I believe is the father of the civil rights movement. So that's going to be a sticking point. And we really have to wonder, will we ever as Black men be able to get a vocal consensus and ideological agreement going, as long as you have individuals, I would argue, from my generation down, because we've been groomed to have a very negative, castigating, dismissive, send you to hell view of that very issue. Brother Spivey, I think you wanted to jump in.
We've been groomed to hate.
Yes.
Basically, we've been groomed to hate and remain non-inclusive to even members of our own cultures and races. Okay. I remember that. I think I'm a little bit older than you, Dr. Jones. I turned 62 yesterday, and I grew up in the ever conservative, sanctified holiness church. And when women did not approach the pulpit. So I can imagine what you saw, but multiply that by 10 times, all right? And I was going to point out, we can't. I introduced James Baldwin this year to my classes, okay? And I had the kids do research. Well, the first thing that pops up.
Okay, Brother Spivey, I want to stop you right there. Hold your thought, okay? Gotcha. Because I know that you and Brother Patrick will appreciate this as people who have used James Baldwin. I mentioned Baldwin in one of my classes, this is several years back. And I just took for granted that my students knew who James Baldwin was.
Right.
Well, this one little sister, she raised her hand, and I'm like, okay, yeah. And then she got a question about Baldwin. I'm talking about the price of the ticket, and and she says to me, Dr. Jones, is he one of the Baldwin brothers?
Oh.
I said, one of the you mean like Alec and Stephen? And she said, yeah. It took everything in me not to bust out laughing. I had to suppress my laughter the entire time. She didn't even know Baldwin was Black.
No.
Okay, go right ahead, brother. Pick your thought back up.
Well, and unless we introduce them to those kids, and like I always say, the earlier the better, so they can remember them as they get up to high school. All right. We have to be all inclusive because that's the way the world is trending, especially in high schools. Okay, especially in high schooes, these kids don't care who sat next to them. Where back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, when I was going to school, having gay people who are members in all of our families come out, was unheard of, right? And in order to be true to seeking an African-American male agenda in a curriculum, we have to be all inclusive. And the women can help us obtain that, because we know it's the women who build the churches. It's the women who are the political powers. All right. It's the women who send their kids or sons to us. All right. And now you remember, and I tell the young ladies in my class, if the women in America would perform a political party and hold to it, there will be a woman president, a vice president, governor, mayors, chief of police, everything. So while we try to build a platform that includes members of the male variety, we have to kind of request some support from the women to get their kids to us. I think it will work if we approached it in the 21st century way, and with the reminders of how we were brought up, because our forefathers did the best they could with the language that they learned in the church, which was male-dominated policy, but the progressive era policy before women got the right to vote, everything was just men-dominated, And so, I'm going to stop because I've been talking a lot tonight, but when we talk about history and stuff, and I like hearing the viewpoints of the brother who, teaches literature, at wherever he is, when he starts throwing out those names, I have flashbacks of what I had to read, and I think the conversation is healthy, Doc. I really do. I yield.
But more Black.
Thank you for that, brother. And please do not silence yourself. Brother Maurice has his hand up, so we go by hands. So raise your hand up, my brother. Reese, you're up now.
All right. Thank you, Doc. Peace and blessings, everybody. From what I've been listening to, I don't think that a specifically male, black male designated class per se, because when you have to deal with issues that are facing us, we don't really have time to be inclusive. You know, we've been down that inclusive route. We have to be now, you know, focused on us and nobody else. When we stop and even think about the rejection that
Okay,
a lot
when
of
you when you
these,
say when you say inclusive, unpack that for us, brother.
right, just deal with black only, just black only. If we're teaching black men how to be men, then we need to be just black only in that classroom. If we're giving them a history of what black men been through, if that's the purpose of the class, then it should be what all black people have been through. Um, and we have to understand, even with that idiocy that they're teaching these days about the slave trade never happened, and you know, we were indigenous to right here in America, and we had white folks as slaves, and all that foolishness. George Washington black, Thomas Jefferson black, Abraham Lincoln black, all these people black. It's a rejection because they don't want to be associated with anything negative that says, you know, at the end of the day, you're a loser, right? They reject Africa because, quote unquote, the system says that we were taken from there, brought here as a slave. So they'll create a whole new narrative. They'll create a whole new narrative to want to fit in their logic because they're suffering from a sickness in reality. And this is not just limited to teenagers. You have older seniors, senior black men and women who bought into this crazy uh, um, type of thinking, and they're teaching it to the younger children. Our brother Omar, he prescribes to that foolishness. Okay, he actually prescribes to that, and he deals with us all the time. But we have to become so concerned about who we are and close the bridge, close that gap between the youth and us, that those of us who have the right knowledge and understand what needs to be done. And we can't do it in an old-fashioned way because that just doesn't work. It's a turnoff. We have to do it in a modern way, and we have to do it in a way that gives them that pride of what it means to be an African male, what it means to be a black man here in America whose roots are in the motherland. They have to have that pride, and trying to come to say, you know, living rainbow, we all under the same, that's just not gonna cut it. It's a turnoff. And with that, I'll rest the mic.
Yeah, I'd like to jump back in right quick. Uh, and I'm listening, to you brothers. My background is, I work in I've been working for my entire adult life in the child welfare system, group homes, foster care, secure detention. Um, and I work with a lot of our young people who do not believe in themselves as Black people. They don't believe in us, that we have any collective potential to be anything more than consumers, dependents. And so, a lot of the young people that I work with have fallen into, heavy gang affiliation, a subculture of self-hatred and parasitical, delinquent behaviors. And, and so they're definitely not on a course to get to college to be able to take advantage of any of the courses that's being talked about. And so I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about, myself and my generation, how we were woken up and how we began to fight our way back from just seeing ourselves as niggers. I know for me, it was hip hop of the late 80s, with the Rakim Allahs and the Public Enemies and the Grand Nubians and that cultural phenomena introduced us to, Malcolm X. It introduced us to Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and David Hilliard and Eldridge Cleaver. It introduced us to Minister Farrakhan and Stokely, Kwame Ture, and people of that ilk. And I don't believe that if it wasn't for hip hop, that we ever would have gotten introduced, to Black consciousness. It wasn't something that, that civic leaders came together and, created some type of initiative. It wasn't something that sprung up out of the churches. It was something that, thank God for these brothers, who and sisters for that matter, who used that art form and politicized it. They added culture, they added dignity and power and made us want to learn, and because in the school systems at that time, there wasn't nobody Black in the curriculums but Dr. King, and it wasn't even the real Dr. King. It was, this watered down, I have a dream, August 28th, 1963, Dr. King. It wasn't the radicalized Dr. King, that a lot of us, know about and some of us don't know about. So I want to answer the question. It definitely needs to be a special effort and initiative to call the Black man back, to his masculinity, to his dignity, to his spirituality, in the sense of, you are here to be, Khalifa. You are here to be, owner. You're here to be, to take possession of your place on this planet. And how that's going to be done, I think, there's a lot of ways that, it needs to be brought back. I think it also needs to be, it has to be shown. It can't just, these kids that I work with, sometimes they respect me because I respect myself. But there's times when they'll say, I am known as Brother Mike X, so they'll say, oh, here come Malcolm, and like it's a joke, because they perceive it as not real. They perceive it as something that's, it has no power to it. It was just a phenomenon that may have happened. It may have been a movie to them, but it's not something that they have faith in. So they'll say something like, oh, here comes Malcolm, and then laugh about it, thinking like they're, clowning me or laughing at me. And to me, I'm like, well, that's a compliment that you would even associate me to that. But I know the power of it. I believe in the power of it, and they don't, So it has to be something, in order for us to make any of these moves, we have to move it from it just being a moral issue, that the schools we send our kids to should allow us to teach our kids about, their history. It has to be an issue. We have to try to make it into an issue of power, the ability to exert power over our communities and over the institutions in our communities, and we have to begin to talk about power and how that is something that without the power, it's always us trying to prove to somebody else that we matter, and they should treat us morally. And it's not about morality to them. It's about power, So we have to be able to begin to speak that language, and, and it has to be about, of course, bringing us together and helping us to learn how to love and appreciate one another again, so that we can build the healthy bonds and attachments that, you know, political power will grow out of, that economic power will grow out of. And I think that there's, you know, it means that there's going to have to be some forerunners. We're going to have to not just sit back and try to fight this battle with the so-called oppressors, or the, you know, the elitists, or the people who are in control, and try to get them to capitulate. Or, you know, we spend all of our time trying to wake up a community that is not awakened. Like, we got to find a way for those who are already primed and ready to begin to show, you know, to get out front and show that some of these things can be done and started, you know. Like the Panthers, you know, to mention the Panthers didn't wait for the community to become radicalized before they did their organizing. They did their organizing first with those who were ready, you know, and had the mindset. And they started to make bold, you know, efforts in the community, like policing the police, you know. And then they, you know, they had their, you know, their meetings and things like that. That captured the attention of the people, and the people, you know, ran to get down with something that they saw was cool. It was something that had strength, and they wanted to associate themselves with the strength. They wasn't associating themselves with, you know, with the ideology that Black people need to have power in their communities. You know, they were associating themselves with the demonstration of power in their communities. You know, so, you know, having said that, I'll fall back.
Brother Mike X, and I piggyback and co-sign with you on that. The main thing about that is recognizing, realizing that Huey P. and those young Panthers, those brothers were in their early 20s, you know, and their voice kind of resonated to the young people. When it all comes about major movements in American history, especially civil rights history, the young people have that important role. All right, because, you know, as we get older, they kind of like, yeah, y'all too old. But when they hear it coming from the young people, and, you know, especially, and I'm going to go back to, with that concept, it could be introduced for people who are working in the environment that you work in, because you see all types of young men. They're going to look at you as a, you know, big brother, big uncle, you know, big daddy, you know. But when you have those young people, you know, spitting out that knowledge, they have a tendency to lean towards them more. So what we had a seminar, and I went to a HBCU Prairie View, where I used to get my frat brothers to come to the elementary school, and we had something called Boys to Men, where we had young brothers, you know, 18, 19 years old, out of college, coming and talking to younger men who were more accepting to them. And when you talk about grassroots efforts and trying to get people involved, especially young people involved, it's best, not the best, but it's probably going to be more appealing to young people, hearing from young people. I think that's a valid point.
All right, gang. Believe it or not, we have reached our time limit. We're a stickler for time. We try to do 60 minutes, and then we close, but we do stay afterwards if you want to hang out a little bit and have a conversation continue to go. Since this is your first time with us, Brother Spivey, you are our honored guest, and we hope that you will not be a stranger. We are here every Thursday during this time, and if you want to join us on Tuesday at 5 o'clock for Brother Maurice's show as well. So
great.
Whenever you can come in, Tuesday at 5 or Thursday at 6:30. We're here doing something, having discussions about the community, and you can share with us. But as I said, you are our guest, and we are going to give you the final word. So you can go ahead and give the final word before we close out. And trust me when I say that you want to hang out through the closing, because you have never heard a closing like we closed here. So,
all right. Well, I would like to thank you, Dr. Jones, for the invitation. You know, you and I go way back. You know, you're one of my former professors, you know, back in the day. And I was always wondering, what happened to you. I was always reading your manhood culture, but when I saw that pop up across my timeline, I'm the oldest teenager on Facebook, so I stay connected. I thought it was good for me just to check things out. I knew it was going to be good, and hearing from the brothers tonight, it's kind of like a whole new period of enlightenment for me, because even though I'm a little older, I've always wanted to hear other brothers and their opinions, and then I can write this stuff down and relay it to my students. But I am so happy to be here tonight, and you can be sure that I'll be hopping in on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Thank you again for the opportunity.
All right, brother. All right. Yeah, this was my compatriot. We both wrote for African American News and Issues for time period until I don't know about Brother Spivey, but I know my employment was terminated there.
we both got a little too radical at times there.
Yeah,
Dr. Jones.
I always wondered if I would ever be the first. How we have these black firsts, and
Mhm.
I believe that I did make it I believe I'm the first black man in the history of,
Mhm.
of this universe or any other universe to be fired from a job because they allege that I messed up their Google Analytics rating. That was the official reason why.
Was that the reason?
That was the reason.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. But we were the one who built it up.
Look here, they accused me. This was the official reason. And do you?
All right. Thank you, Doc, and another excellent program. As we always say, you kill the nigga in you, I'm gonna kill the nigga in me. And our God will reign supreme. We are Black first. Today, tomorrow, and forever.
All right now.
Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.
Love you as well, my brother.